What causes one to become irritable when hungry? Humans like to think of themselves as entities that are in control of their reactions, but frequently experience scenarios where their base biological system manipulates their behavior. This is ultimately because, at a fundamental level, human beings are mammals that evolved from primates. As time progressed for our species, the main evolution was present in the brain. In simple terms, the brain can be thought of as two layers: the limbic system and the cortex. Current neuroscience research delivers the explanation that the core feature of a human brain that distinguishes it from other primates is the development of the prefrontal cortex. In a 2018 paper, neuroscientist PhD Chad Donahue wrote, "Using tissue volume analyses, we show a disproportionately large amount of gray and white matter corresponding to prefrontal cortex in humans compared with non-human primates. The limbic system is the base of the brain, and over time the cortex has evolved to include more rational thought. This understanding of the human brain and its components gives us insight into the nature of our being and what drives our decision making. Although human beings are capable of rational thought, they ultimately succumb to animalistic impulses that override the rational mind in the pursuit of egotistical short-term pleasures. For as long as there have been humans, there have been those who have contemplated and formed their own opinion on the true nature of our species. Some even go as far as to create ethical belief systems that revolve around their core understandings of what makes a human a human. To dive into one of these philosophers in particular, let's narrow the focus upon Mill. Mill is an advocate of the philosophy of utilitarianism, which states that one should act with the guiding principle of maximizing happiness for the greatest number of sentient beings. A large theme in Mill's philosophy is to put the collective good above your own. Much of utilitarianism is based on altruistic thought and action, utilizing a high degree of rationality to come to a conclusion on an action which will serve the greater good. To be clear, this is what Mill has declared what ought to be done, not necessarily what is the nature of an individual. To emphasize further, Mill believes a noble action to the benefit of the collective should be what every individual strives for. He's well aware of the default nature of human beings. One excerpt that highlights Mill's view on human nature is as follows. They pursue sensual indulgences to the injury of health, though perfectly aware that health is the greater good. Here Mill is commenting on the fact that human beings desire sensual indulgences that provide immediate pleasure to the detriment of their own health. A sensual indulgence can be considered succumbing to a pleasure that's derived by something physical, such as eating food that tastes good but is bad for one's health. He goes one step further and even claims that they do so while being fully cognizant that this is an inferior pleasure. This quote from Mill exemplifies his belief about how humans act at their core. The belief system, utilitarianism, that he's developed is arguing for one to go past the nature of their being and make difficult, unbiased decisions. Mill advocates for this because he knows humans at large possess the mental faculties to come to a rational conclusion about what is the right thing to do for the collective. Although humans are capable of this line of thinking, Mill argues that they act against it due to sensual impulses. Another philosopher who has tackled the nature of humans and derived wisdom on how to operate as a human being is Immanuel Kant. Kant's philosophy can be summed up with the infamous phrase, the categorical imperative. One can interpret it as an absolute demand to universalize your maxim, meaning that you should only act in a manner that you desire all others to act as well. In a hypothetical scenario where one is left with the decision to lie and gain something from another, under a Kantian perspective, the individual should not lie unless they were okay with the consequence of every other human being acting in a like manner. The driving force of this philosophy is having autonomy. Kant describes autonomy as being able to think rationally and make your own decisions. This is counter to the belief of heteronomy, which states that one is manipulated and ultimately makes decisions because of external forces. Kant presents a very demanding philosophy that requires a significant amount of critical thinking prior to making an action. His view on human nature can be summed up by saying that human beings are strongly manipulated by external forces, but ultimately possess the potential to overcome them in an exercise of autonomy. The following statement from Kant provides deeper insight into his view of human nature. Hence, autonomy is the ground of the dignity of human nature and of every rational creature. In this statement, Kant is arguing that autonomy, the ability to think rationally for yourself, is the distinguishing factor for a rational creature. As stated in the introduction, the distinguishing characteristic of the human brain from primates is the prefrontal cortex, which is where rational thought originates. In Kant's belief, The thing that makes us human and separate from other animals is this rational mind. Therefore, it's human nature to be a rational creature. Analyzing the quote further, Kant also relates to the idea of dignity, which can be thought of as a state of being worthy of honor or respect. Tying it all together, Kant is claiming that the worthy part of human nature arises from the execution of autonomy. This quote leaves open to interpretation the other, less worthy aspects of human nature. Through additional sections of the text, he makes arguments that humans have impulses and inclinations that are less worthy parts of our nature. Ultimately, Kant's belief system operates around the claim that the unique characteristic that differentiates humans from mere animals is their ability to rationalize. In an attempt to unify the belief systems of Kant and Mill, we see both philosophers tackle the idea that humans should act in a way which is desirable for the collective good. Kant encourages one to universalize their maxim as a part of the categorical imperative, and Mill's take on utilitarianism is largely about acting in a way which provides the most benefit to the greatest number of people. These philosophers have similar beliefs on how one should act, but include varying arguments on human nature. With a better understanding of Mill's and Kant's philosophies on human nature, a comparison should be made between their belief systems and the original introductory claim of this video, which states that human beings are capable of rational thought, but succumb to short-term pleasures due to animalistic impulses. Beginning with Mill, the quote chosen previously aligns well with this claim. Mill desires for humans to push past these impulses and use rational thought to derive actions which are in the interest of the greater good. Although this is his desire, he notes that humans usually pursue short-term pleasures even when they're aware of the right action to make. To build upon this argument made by Mill, it's important to understand what else drives this rational mind. Referring again to the domain of neuroscience, there's evidence to support the idea that the cortex is driven by the limbic system to fulfill its survival desires. Within the limbic system exists the amygdala, which is mainly responsible for the processing of emotions like fear and pleasure. When a human is exposed to a certain stimulus, it gets processed by the brain and triggers neural pathways which will release neurotransmitters and change the chemical balance of the brain. When one sees a predator, the amygdala will cause a chain reaction of fight or flight signals. When one fills an empty stomach with a big meal, the amygdala will release pleasure-inducing neurotransmitters. This advanced understanding of the brain's reward system complements Mill's original claim about humans succumbing to sensual indulgences. These understandings of our neurology were not available back in the day of these famous philosophers, so their belief systems must be altered with the presence of new information. To circle back, the limbic system is where the strong emotions are present, and our cortex exists on top of that, creating rational thought that guides our actions to fulfill the emotions that are triggered by the limbic system. Through this explanation, one could arrive at the conclusion that the rational mind is not all that rational, and simply fulfills the desires of the animalistic mind that exists beneath it. The previous argument provides a deeper understanding of the brain and how it controls the nature of humans, which is in support of Mill's view of human nature and counter to that of Kant's. To tackle Kant's argument on human nature more deeply, a further analysis of the motivating factors of the rational mind must occur. Here, the primary argument is that rational thought is manipulated by the ego. The ego exists within the cortex, which is where rational thought occurs. The ego can be thought of as a part of the brain that gives a human the sense of self-identity. Throughout one's life, experiences build up the ego and alter the motives of future decisions. One can make what they believe to be rational thought, but the underlying motives of the ego are almost certainly in self-interest. Due to this objective truth about the biology of the human brain, it makes it much more difficult to make the right decision due to the personal basis that exists even within the rational mind. This can be seen as counter to Kant's belief about rationality, as there can be truly no rational objective thought, for it's always biased by the ego. If one is to argue that a being can reach a state of objectivity and separation from personal basis, that might be true, but if it is the case, that is certainly not true of the human being. Through the further analysis of how the human mind operates, one can conclude that humans possess a rational mind, but that mind is not as rational as someone like Kant would suggest. Even within this rational mind, there exists an ego which manipulates reality to present thought that falls within one's best interest. Ultimately, one's view of human nature depends upon what it is about a human being that makes them a human. From a Kantian perspective, the distinguishing factor of a human is the rational mind, and this is what separates humans from animals. In terms of Mill's claim, he believes that human nature is to pursue sensory indulgences even when it is in contrast to the logical mind. Through this analysis of philosophy and biology, a variety of perspectives were analyzed and compared to come to the final conclusion that human beings have the unique characteristic of the rational mind over other creatures. But this rational mind is driven by an animalistic mind which manipulates its decision-making into the direction of short-term, instant gratification pleasures that serve the individual.